Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirk the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files RPG podcast, talking bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day. This is the second part of episode 14, which was all about fanzines, PBMs and the fan scene back in the early to mid-80s here in the UK. It features extra bits that didn't quite fit in the first part. It's a big un. Take your time. Regular breaks with tea and hobnob biscuits will get you through it. It's like one of those elaborate handmade inserts you find in a zine that's been a labour of love for someone, but you can't quite make head nor tail of it. The first part was really well received. I'm always grateful of feedback, as you know, but there's been a genuine outpouring of fond memories of PBMs and zines that people used to play. We even got a mention from Mike Lewis, one of the editors of Dragon Lords alongside Ian Marsh, who was the man who launched 1,000 zines thanks to his regular column in Imagine magazine. The appearance of listings in the mainstream encouraged dozens of RPG players to make a zine of their own. It's gratifying to think that our humble podcast could have a similar effect. We've inspired at least one. The Bones of the Lost God is a PBM zine that's been created by Phil Cooper, handcrafted with distinctive, quirky and high quality artwork. It's following in the footsteps of the Gladiators Gazette, the PBM zine I wrote about in the first Grognard Files zine last year. Check out Phil's Twitter timeline at RumoursMatrix to track the progress of the project, or visit his website. There's a link in the show notes. So, what have we got in this file? Ian Marsh, the editor of Dragon Lords and White Dwarf, faces the Games Master screen to relate some of his thoughts and anecdotes from his career in gaming. At Daily Dwarf returns with more about Dagon magazine. This time he goes all Melvin Bragg and discusses literary criticism. Don't worry, the tone takes a nosedive when my esteemed co-host Blythe joins me in the attic of Dirk Towers to dip into the post bag and look back and share fanzines recommended by our listeners. Finally, we're putting together the second Grognard Files zine, so you can find out how you can get your copy at the end of the pod. I can hear flaps clapping together. A gentle thud. The post has arrived. A new grog pod has come through the letterbox and landed on your mat. Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Games Master screen with Ian Marsh.
Ian Marsh returns to face the Games Master screen. I'm going to put this flimsy partition between us, and I have an autobiographical table that I'm going to roll on, apparently at random. Okay, are you ready for this, Ian?
I'm ready. I have my D6 ready to counter you.
Okay, here goes. I'm rolling on a percentile dice, so here goes. We've got a 0, 1. So that's a critical, very critical. It's an acrostic. So if we don't
it was
tell
quite
us
caustic. Yeah, well, for anyone who has not seen White Dwarf 77, there is a special message on the content page on the alternate subheading of each piece of the contents, and it does read "Sod off, Brian Ansell." Brian, of course, was taking over Games Workshop at that point and had decided to move all operations up to Nottingham. So the whole London design studio was going to be closing down, and we were all offered the choice of moving up to Nottingham or taking redundancy. The short of it is I decided that life was in London. I took redundancy. I've seen rumours that I was sacked, which aren't true. Basically, I took redundancy, got a redundancy payment, and started looking for a new job. However, it doesn't mean I wasn't bitter about the whole thing. Been offered properly the title of editor several months beforehand, and would have had only 3 actual issues to my name as editor. You know, it's a job I loved. Time under Jamie Thompson was fantastic, one of my best bosses ever, and I was doing something I really enjoyed, that I was confident about doing. Yeah, so I was annoyed that it was basically going to go for me. I had actually been up to Nottingham before. When I was at university, you may remember, Dragon Lords had 4 duck figures it produced, little 25mm miniatures, which I sculpted. They're not the best sculpts in the universe. However, it was one area I explored, and I think I sent off a llama I'd sculpted for RingQuest to Citadel and Brian Ansel, and Brown commented on it, and I went up and saw him about sculpting. So nothing came of that. But it's one of those trips to Nottingham where I go, I don't like Nottingham. I'm terribly sorry if you live there. I've been up there for a university interview on one of the wettest, foulest days of the year, with the Trent running turbid and yellow. Don't remember it being particularly bright and sunny when I went up to see Brian for sculpting. And then there was the period of being wooed by people like Alan Merritt, who was Brian Ansel's number 2 and number 1 yes man. Angus Ryle, who was formerly from Crash magazine, who was running around like a headless chicken trying to get people to join up. And Paul, of course, Paul Coburn, that is, trying to get us to come up. And I know he talked about the dinner. He'd taken over this design studio to try to persuade them to go, and basically got told to F off. I don't remember any of that. I mean, I joked to Paul that, it's sort of basically, I remember the candlelight twinkling in his eyes and the words he softly whispered to me as, I want you. I want you. I want you as a new recruit. But no, I don't remember any of what Paul. I've always liked to known him from when we were on Dragon Lords and sort of outside the industry, and got on quite well. He always described himself as an East End wide boy, I think, and he lives up to it. He's got a slight New Zealand twang to his accent now.
Talk about that. The moment you decided that you were going to use the content page to express your feelings.
Well, the trouble is, if you make someone redundant and they want to express it and they're creative. I don't think I knew the word acrostic at the time, so I'd working out what I could write. And going, it's more subtle doing it on the sub-headline, so it appears every other letter. It's not as obvious. And I got stuck because I couldn't think of anything beginning with O, and this was under gobbledygook. And Paul Mason, bless him, came up with obitses, how I ate those obitses, and gave me my O, which was his contribution to it. There was a hint that I wasn't going to get on anyway. We reached the time on White Dwarf where there was pressure to include Warhammer articles, and these terribly written contributions would turn up, and I would reject them, which didn't go down well. Not going to put any old crap in White Dwarf, despite what people may think. It's got to have some merit, and it's got to be moderately well written and clear. I don't like working with someone who has yes men to keep him going, or apparently keep him going. Mark Gascoigne, bless him, who has always been happy to say what he thinks. I think that's his most notorious feature from Dragon Lords. Went up to Nottingham and didn't last particularly long before he got sacked the first time, and then went on to the publishing side there. But it's
I like to say it as the spirit of Dragon Lords having one final death rattle.
It is, but I mean, we weren't, not just me on the contents page. The design studio went berserk on the news page of that issue. The trouble is, this is the level of trust Games Workshop had in its for people who was making redundant. It said, "Oh, just fax us the final copy of the news page and we're okay it. Now, back in that day, magazines were put together on blue grids with bits of photo bromide from a linotype machine, which were stuck down with cow gum. And what you basically did was put together one news page and faxed it, got it approved, and you peeled off all the bits that were covering up the attack on Games Workshop. So the design studio was also quite masterful, sabotaging the issue, as well as me doing my little acrostic.
Brilliant. Okay, let's roll again. Okay, I've got 25.
Ooh.
And that's the Judge Dredd role-playing game. So
right, yeah.
You have the writing credits for that. So
I have a writing credit because I think I did the initiative system for it. This is such a long time ago, and it wasn't one of my major projects. It was basically Mark Gascoigne who was the driver on that side of it. But basically, he got stuck on something, and I think I came up with an initiative system. I can't remember what it was. This is the curious thing about Mark and myself. Mark is the editor. I'm the rules writer. Yeah, I'm the one who's been doing editing for ages, and Mark is the one who's been writing rules.
Really?
It's now switched back because Mark went on to the Black Library books for Workshop, and then now has his own publishing company, Angry Robot. And I've obviously moved into writing rules. So as a contribution to the rules, I've got a credit because I got involved with a bit of the rules mechanics, and I think playing some of it.
So at that time was a lot of crossover between the design teams on the games and your activities on White Dwarf.
Yeah, well, White Dwarf was sort of its own separate little office of, in effect, me and Paul. The design studio, you had Mary Common, who was the production editor, and Albie Fiore, and a couple of layout artists to do the book. So they also, as well as pasting up White Dwarf, I remember Albie working long and hard on the design of Golden Heroes. Forgive me, I can't remember his full name, Bemo, who was doing the work on Judge Dredd with little paper characters and everything, which was really up his street. And we had a fantastic girl called Sheila Dwyer, who was basically there in full punk white face makeup and tartan. It was quite. I was quite considerably drab in comparison. But it was interesting, and so all the people who do paste up worked on both the games and the magazine. But within Workshop itself, basically you had Mark working on game design, and I was on White Dwarf. It's just we'd bounce ideas off each other. I think it's the best way of describing it. So if you were stuck or whatever, I got asked about it because I used to go off to various conventions. I think Convulsion, but at one ConeCon, I think this was when we were working on my Judge Dredd role-playing game, and one fanzine editor, Trevor Mendham, just basically took me to task about it and saying, would it be cheaper if it didn't have all the little cardboard characters in it? This isn't one of my projects. And then going, and I think I probably foolishly tried to defend it by saying, is it, saying what they added to it, it's like being a politician and not answering the question. And you go, actually, the reality is it wouldn't be much cheaper without it, because it would still sell at a fixed price. I'd switched from being fanzine editor to establishment, and I think it's just, people suddenly go, well, you've changed your colour, haven't you? And you go, yes, well, you have to. I mean, that's in a sense part of the reason why Dragon Lords had to stop, because I couldn't sort of maintain ribbing Ian and Steve at Workshop and to continue to put out their magazine. So you've got to suddenly go, that has to stop.
I'm going to roll again. 42. Doctor Who, Time Lord.
Oh, right, yes. That's one of my great achievements, I think. Doctor Who role-playing game started as an idea at Games Workshop. Two of the sales teams, Peter Darvill-Evans and Jervis Johnson, had basically wanted to do a Doctor Who role-playing game and had come up with a card-based system. But they needed someone to basically put it together. And this is when I was editorial assistant on Dwarf. And so they picked me. And, I enjoy Doctor Who. I'm sort of particularly strongly influenced by John Pertwee's Doctor and Joe Grant period. And John Pertwee banging on about being good to the planet and everything. It's why I'm decidedly green in my political outlook. If John Pertwee was around to go, did this have any effect? You go, yes, it did. So it's influenced me ever since. I've always been fond of Doctor Who, and I'd liked the opportunity of doing this. My writing skills at that point weren't as good, quite frankly. Working on a fanzine and White Dwarf don't actually put your writing skills up to a brilliant standard, but it was an opportunity to develop. And we basically got a game together with this deck of cards, which we called the TARDIS, which had a set of results from A, B, C, D on it about what you needed to achieve a result. The trouble is, Phaser in the States was also working on a Doctor Who role-playing game, and they beat us to the license. I think partly Games Workshop was relying on the fact it had a license for a Doctor Who board game, that it could actually produce a Doctor Who role-playing game. But Phaser basically got the license first, and work on that version stopped. There's probably a small deck of cards made out of photobromide and green paper sitting in a Parker Quink box somewhere in my boxes in my life, kept as a memento, but that's it. That's all that remains of that. But I kept an eye on the license for the game, and when it expired, because they're typically only for something like 3 years, I approached Peter Darvill-Evans, who'd by then gone on to work for Target Books, and I was editing Doctor Who novelisations for him. Said, well, I've got a great idea for a system that will really suit the teleplay of Doctor Who. What do you think? The licence has expired. You can check that. And he did, and it had. And he said, great, yes, as long as I'm also a co-writer. And so that sort of led to the genesis of Time Lord. But background to the system is, because I said I was with Paul Mason, my editorial assistant, was also my flatmate for a while, in very much into working out game mechanics. And we'd come up with something which was loosely called the top flat system, which was an effect-based dice system using 2d6. Peter Darvill-Evans, I think, came up with the phrase "beat the difference," and I just come up with the actual system. So the idea is that Doctor Who, the characters, aren't particularly special. They have odd little skills. The person with all the skills is the Doctor, and so it's actually a very hard game to role play in the conventional sense. If you role play because you like experience points and going up levels and increasing your skills and becoming better, I don't think Doctor Who is that game. Sort of Time Lord uses templates, and it's quite early in games for using templates for characters and saying that's who you play. There's a slight chance you can improve, but there's no actual character progression system. And I think the trouble there is I was probably 20 to 30 years ahead of my time. And what I should do is drop Time Lord through time and space to now, where the concept that you might play a fixed character would probably go down better.
Yes. Yeah.
Because otherwise I think, because more of my role playing has been about playing the character than actually worrying about progression. I mean, obviously you want to get better, you want to succeed, but so much of the entertainment comes from the story and taking part in it. Without going too extreme on that level, gamers like rolling dice, and so what you have to do with that is have a mechanic that reflects a teleplay, whereas elite troops firing at point blank range cannot hit a thing, because that's what Doctor Who does. I was working full-time as a sub-editor on a magazine called Estates Times, and I basically quit my job for a year. Target had been taken over by Virgin at that point, so I got an advance on royalties, and I spent a year watching Doctor Who tapes and writing rules. I know nowadays, you're used to the idea you can go out and you can buy Doctor Who from way back on disc, and back then it didn't exist. You had a few official videos from the BBC at a very high price. This is where one of my friends from university came in, because he had contacts through the Doctor Who fan network. I supplied him videotapes, and he would provide me copies of virtually everything in existence from Doctor Who. In addition to that, I had a period when Paul Mason was still at Warwick University, and they would have Doctor Who weekends. So I spent some of my life while I was at workshop sleeping on Paul Mason's floor at Warwick University to watch Doctor Who and Blake 7. And that's another difference between the early version of the Doctor Who role-playing game from workshop, where there was no background information apart from novelizations, to going on to doing Time Lord, where I viewed everything I could to get all the background I could to make the game as authentic as possible. Because for one thing that is evident about Doctor Who fandom, there are people who know a lot about the background, and they're very keen. And if you write something stupid or wrong, they will let you know. I felt I had to research it. I had the material to write it, and I wanted also to capture the flavour of Doctor Who, which is why you've got skills like MacGuffin and bench thumping in there. The Fazza version had gone on and on about jelly babies, and really labouring a joke about jelly babies. And you go, there is one thing about America: it can sometimes completely miss British humour and not understand it. And I think they missed it with the Doctor Who role-playing game, and it's what I tried to put into Time Lord. There are odd bits I've made up and put in there. I think I made up Home Planet of the Ogrons, and someone criticised me on my Latin, I think, on one fan page. But the point about it is, I named the planet Ogros because it's basically, you can say, where do they come from? Oh, gross. There's my own private joke, because back then Betty Boo was quite popular in the charts with Where Are You Baby, so the sample character at the back is her. It's just called Alison because that's her real name, and so basically the idea was she would just wander into the TARDIS from a science fiction music set and go off. But that's it. The idea is, you could generate yourself as a character. I mean, we won't go into the alarming things about what happens if you were killed as yourself in a role-playing game and the psychological trauma that involves. But the idea was to try to properly recreate the TV series in the game.
And it remains a great source book as well, doesn't it? Of material.
Lovingly researched. I've still got the original notes in a cupboard somewhere. It's basically when I've watching videos, I'd write down things when one of the companions did something, if it could be read as an ability, I think in terms of modern day, so when Billie Piper swings on a chain and goes on about her bronze in gymnastics or something, you'd go gymnastics 1 as a skill and write the context down. A soft spot for Michael Craze and Anique Wills as Ben and Polly. That's Patrick Troughton era, and that's also my hide behind the sofa period, where I couldn't stay in the room long enough, but would keep coming back in to watch more. And it's curious, the things that I remember most are not the Daleks as being scary, but the Cybermen, because you got black and white telly and these harsh carrot figures on screen. I've got vivid memories of the Tomb of the Cybermen as a kid. It scared me completely. So I was delighted when that particular story was found, but of course it hadn't been found in time to write Help with Time Lord.
And if listeners look hard enough, when the internet came along, you actually made that available, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, after a while, when basically, obviously, I think Time Lord only had a print run of 8,000. I believe it all sold out. And I've had this memory of seeing it in the windows of Foyles for one day, and I walked past in London, which was a proud moment. Yeah, it's unfortunately they obviously weren't going to reprint it, and so I asked if I could have the rights to it back. It got cleared, so I have the rights to the game and Peter's permission to republish it, and so I put it on the internet. So yes, it's been out there. There's something I regret. It's back in 1990 or so when I was working on it, the convention was to write he as a gender neutral, and I would now change that one day to work around that. You think going back to women in D&D or women in role playing, you go, you're very rare, or you're not anymore, and you tend to get that sort of one-sided view of things, and you go, well, we'll stick with convention. You're writing a set of rules. We'll write something that's clear to understand. I know it's not necessarily ideal, but it is the clearest, shortest way of writing. If writing he instead of the player or the player character all the time, it saves you a considerable amount of space. And there is no acceptable compromise on he, she, or it, apart from shit.
Very true, very true. Well, listeners can seek that out if using the appropriate search tool. I'm going to...
And please don't condemn me for the non-PC writing of it.
Okay. I'm going to go for the next one, and I've got 63. Next, it's Adventurer, because you did quite a few contributions to Adventurer magazine.
I'm just all right. I think I'll roll my d6 at this point and try to parry that one.
My goodness, this is a challenge. This has never happened before.
That's a nipple.
A nipple?
A nipple. Which in Dragonlords means I think I win the debate, so I'm going to switch topic and I'm going to roll again. And that's a poo emoji.
Poo emoji?
Yeah, which makes me think of Imagine. I'm sure a number of people would like to know how White Dwarf and Imagine got on. So
yeah, because we've actually had the other side, haven't we? We've heard from Paul Coburn in an earlier episode of what it was like on the Imagine side. So yeah, let's hear it from the Dwarf side.
Well, mentioning Paul, Paul and a number of TSR crew we knew as Dragonlords. So before I went and joined Games Workshop, we'd been excited about Imagine coming out as fanzine editors. We ruthlessly tore into the staff at TSR as much as Games Workshop in Dragonlords. So people like Don Turnbull and Paul and Mike Brunton all got it in the neck occasionally. I noticed looking back at some Dragonlords, we were quite rude. I implied that I think at the time the Blooms were taking over TSR, the initials of Kevin, and then Gary Gygax and Brian spelt KGB. So we so it's very odd because we'd been to I particularly went to conventions such as TSR's Games Fair and got on with people. It's where the only time I've run into Gary Gygax. And of course, with the launch of Imagine, we'd seen the samples, sample issue that had come out. I think I've still got one somewhere, and sort of got to know the crew. I'd actually, before I joined Workshop, gone up to TSR in Cambridge for the job of project administrator. So I was obviously keen to try to get a job in the games industry, and I think TSR were quite keen to interview me because of all the stuff I'd done on Dragon Lords, and I could clearly write. But I think I had one of the worst interviews I can remember. You was given an editing test, and it's a D&D based one, and I realised I didn't play enough D&D, so I didn't understand a whole pile of fairly standard abbreviations in TSR modules, so I didn't know what this word THACO was, and it's the abbreviation for to hit armor class 0.
Yeah.
And it didn't mean anything to me. It's just one of those moments where I look at something and go completely blank.
Well, if it's any consolation, I've played D&D a few times with THACO, and I still don't understand it. So
the trouble is, it was there, no one used it. It was there as convenience, so you knew what number you needed to hit that armor class, and no one used it because we all looked it up on the tables. But so that was my sort of rough involvement with TSR. So it was then quite odd going on to work on White Dwarf, and then suddenly this magazine had been a rival to White Dwarf, was actually something I had to think about, because it had been going slightly before, slightly before I actually joined as editorial assistant on Dwarf, and I knew Paul Coburn, who's quite a character. Imagine did actually drive a lot of what happened on White Dwarf. I was never really, when I got up to assistant editor and editor, I was never worried about Imagine. But the whole thing about Imagine, it continued to influence what I did on White Dwarf.
In what ways did it influence you then? So how did it? What tangible difference did it make to the editorial content of Dwarf?
I think we moved over to using articles that made people think a bit more. There's a role for the standard stuff such as adventures and monsters, magic items, and so on. But it was also trying to get articles that really made people think about role playing. I mean, in part of that also reflects what my role playing was doing at the time. We were moving away from leveling up and experience, and more into the story, and not necessarily at high power. Well, I don't think I've ever actually played in a high power role playing campaign, because it's just not my thing. The whole experience of it is key. But again, without that lean towards people who would regard White Dwarf as boring because it it didn't excite them. You go, well, yes, there are the fanzine press in particular. It has a more extreme view, and you can't listen to an extreme as the sole guidance on what you're going to do. You could be influenced by it, and I think we took on board some of the things that were being said about White Dwarf, trying to create the interest, but without taking it too far away from a mainstream approach, and something that needed to sell to general gamers.
When Imagine finished, how did that feel?
Oh, it was a big relief. But again, it's sad, because when you've got something there as a rival, it continues to spur you onwards. Got to up your game. So it is sad when something that drives you on goes, because it suddenly becomes harder to keep up that sort of level of focus on making a magazine better. Perhaps it's just me. I always like having a spur. Rather, otherwise I tend to go into coast mode. It's as true today as it was back then.
And you mentioned Marcus L. Rowland, and fans of the podcast hold Marcus in high esteem, but I think you inferred that wasn't always the case back in the day.
Well, it's the different views. I say the more active fans, less keen. I got the impression of from them at various hobby meets and so on about Marcus, and you don't really appreciate what he does. And it's reassuring to know that he does in fact have a huge fan base himself who appreciate what he did. And I'm sure he's influenced a lot of people with his adventures and ideas and shape their role playing. And there again, we can use other stuff from, say, Dragon Lords. I think Chris Elliott and Dick Edwards were two of the really creative people that we came across for Dragon Lords, and they did the ecology of the Piercer and Slay Wars, and I think we redid Slay Wars for White Dwarf at some point, because they had a real sense of fun, and so that's a balance to some of the more serious aspects. So a little bit of Dragon Lord's humour, getting into White Dwarf, and trying to make it fun as well as useful in every single way.
Let's roll again on the table. I've got 15, and this is Fighting 15. Huzzah!
Ooh. Huzzah! Right. Well, yes, that's rules and toy soldiers. As I said, I've moved down to the Isle of Wight in 1999 and gone freelance. I had started working and sort of progressed gradually back to computers and computer games. So the last magazine I worked on full time was PC Gaming World up in London. So it's one of those great situations. I was caged up in London, keeping in touch with friends and working on magazines as freelance, and also playing computer games at home for a living. But like all good things, they sort of come to an end. So what I did was turn to something I knew I could do, which was painting figures, both from role playing and from way back. I've always been able to paint figures neatly. I just got a steady hand. And I'd like to think an eye for detail. So I decided to set up a figure painting service. And of course, the internet obviously been going, because I was doing a lot of work over the internet as well by then. But also you had forums, and one of the miniatures forums at the times mentioned a range of 18mm Napoleonic British from a company called Eureka Miniatures in Australia. And someone wrote, "Does anyone stock them in the UK?" And I thought, no one does. But Fighting 15s was set up first as a painting service, which I was running for about 2 years, and then started to have moved to e-commerce once I picked up Eureka Miniatures. Eureka was then the agent for AB Figures in Australia. AB also had a UK side, but there was some licensing change, and I got AB Figures as well. And basically, that's given me the basis for the toy soldier side of the business. So I have, I think, one of the best ranges of 15mm historicals and 20mm World War II figures in the world that I sell, and then I've basically just been fortunate in who I've been doing business with to get them. So I basically turned up in London one day to see my friends from editing and said, I'm going to be importing these. And I produced these 28mm teddy bear figures in uniforms, which Eureka now unfortunately doesn't make. And I think I probably left my friends slightly stunned about what I was doing. So that's sort of how I got involved changed from painting service to toy soldier empire. And it's a small empire. It keeps me fully busy, which is what I need. As things like the acrostic show, I'm not actually fond of working for people.
I think it's great, Ian, that you've managed to get back to your roots, and you started the story about how you started with Urfix kits and starting with those, and you've had a whole career, and you've managed to go back to your origins. That's great.
Yes, oddly, yes, I started professionally packing boxes in Games Workshop's warehouse for soldiers and stuff, and now I'm packing boxes of soldiers of stuff. So yes, you could say I've gone back to my roots, or I haven't moved on.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Ian, for sharing the time with us and telling your stories. They're great. Thank you.
Thank you very
Billy
much.
Dwarf does Dagon again.
Literary criticism. Literary criticism? Blimey, that's a bit highbrow, isn't it? I thought we were looking at an RPG fanzine. Well, as I discussed last time, Dagon often carried short stories, but over time more and more articles from the scholarly heavyweights of Lovecraftian analysis started to appear, really delving into the minutiae of mythos fiction and related fields. I think it was in Dagon 17 that this really took hold. The issue was focused on the theme of the Cthulhu mythos and the occult. It was like nothing I'd ever read before. It kicked off with an article by Lee Blackmore on Lovecraft's use of the occult in his fiction. I think the main aim of the article was to slay the idea that Lovecraft knew more than he let on, and perhaps he was speaking truths when he veiled in the form of fiction. Mr. Blackmore quoted a succession of modern occultists like Kenneth Grant and Anton LaVey, and their attempts to link Lovecraft into various pet occult theories. It gave all these crazy notions both barrels with an extensive refutations from Lovecraft's correspondence. While he was clearly happy to use occult symbolism in his fiction, Lovecraft nevertheless regarded all superstitions as being without a shred of credence. Issue 17 also contained a great article by Mark Valentine on the influence on Lovecraft of the Welsh writer Arthur Machen. Now, Machen is a very different individual from Lovecraft, a self-styled mystic with a genuine interest in the occult. He was a good friend of noted occultist A.E. Waite and fellow member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. A very different worldview of that of Lovecraft then. Nevertheless, Machen's haunting stories, which often draw an ancient primal horror from the surrounding landscape, share a number of thematic parallels with those of H.P. Lovecraft, and in this article Valentine examined these links in detail, both generally and in the specific famous works of the two authors, such as The Call of Cthulhu and the novel The Black Seal. One other article from this issue I'll quickly mention is one from the noted Lovecraftian scholar Robert Price on Lovecraft's use in his fiction of theosophy, the somewhat barking set of ideas around the occult metaphysics made popular by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky in the late 19th century. Price's analysis, both the fiction and the letters of Lovecraft, examined both the use of specific details from theosophy, like the Book of Dagon and the city of Shambhala, and the more oblique use of its themes and the archaic truth, terrible in its reality. Price showed that, once again, while Lovecraft was happy to draw on the ideas of theosophy to lend his depiction of the occult a certain verisimilitude, he still retained a healthy scepticism in his view of its adherents as charlatans. Heady stuff, but also fascinating. These articles in Dagon never came across as dry or academic. They were accessible to read and really added a depth to the stories of Lovecraft. I'd yet to read any of his letters at this point, and so I was unaware of his influences and the background to many of his tales. Articles in Dagon really helped to fill the gaps and added to my appreciation of his work. And this analysis didn't stop at Lovecraft. When Dagon published its author specials, the works of these writers were also put under the critical spotlight. Two highlights from these issues: Et Diabolus Incarnatus Est, The Ceremonies and Themes of Arthur Machen by Mark Valentine, and The Lost Art of Twilight, Two Aspects of the Vampire by Simon McCulloch. Mark Valentine's article returned to the influence of Arthur Machen once more, this time on T.E.D. Klein and his novel The Ceremonies. As a quick aside, this was another example of Dagon introducing an author to me. Arthur Machen is very undervalued and underappreciated writer of horror fiction, whose work I'd really recommend. There's also a thread that runs through him, through Robert Ekman, and to Ramsey Campbell, all writers who deal with the spider touch of fear in their unsettling and disturbing stories. Valentine highlighted Klein and Machen's shared sense of power in folklore and mythology, both in the plots and the underpinning themes of the respective authors' works. He analysed how the protagonists surrendered to the supernatural agents and were subsumed in a greater and darker mystery, seeing beyond the veil. A very Lovecraftian idea too, of course. He looked at both writers' ideas around the horror of corruption and how it differed in a writer working at the beginning of the 20th century compared with one working at the end. Reading this article over again, Valentine's arguments remain very persuasive. It makes me want to go back and reread both Machen and Klein at the very earliest opportunity. Simon McCulloch's article, meanwhile, appeared in the Thomas Ligotti issue and was a forensic examination of Ligotti's story, The Lost Art of Twilight. McCulloch undertook a detailed deconstruction of the vampire myth through Ligotti's story, also looking at vampire fiction from Bram Stoker, you might have heard of that one, and Robert McCammon, and Joe Lansdale into the bargain. He presented Ligotti's story as a distillation of the essence of the vampire myth, the seductive glamour of eternal youth, free from the effects of change and time. But this high ideal comes at a cost, a total submission to the subhuman cravings of a vampire's bestial nature. McCulloch expertly illustrated both aspects of the nature of the vampire through Ligotti's story in this comprehensive and authoritative article. Dagon featured many such in-depth articles, and my 17-year-old self devoured them all. And, is often the case with the serious young man, I started to take H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos very seriously indeed. So much so that I went off to seek more, buying back issues of Crypt of Cthulhu and Lovecraft Studies to get my fix of the writings of the likes of S.T. Joshi, Robert Price and Will Murray. Fortunately, Dagon itself was not afraid to puncture such pomposity and released 2 humour specials, issues 16 and 27, guaranteed to cause offence to serious-minded Lovecraft aficionados. Issue 16 was particularly good. It featured The Sinister Secret of Shoggoth Street by H.P. Luddite, which took a rather obvious route of Lovecraft's pastiche, but did contain a memorable line. "Don't go in the house on Shoggoth Street, 'cause if you do you'll get eaten." Rather more nuanced was the one of Neil Gaiman's first published stories, I, Cthulhu, an autobiography of a certain misunderstood great old one, as dictated to a human slave, Whately. Dagon also boasted the Red Brains Trust, a regular question and answer column written by Peter Jeffrey. He holds the distinction of penning the first non-gaming article for Dagon, Lovecraft, a literary anomaly, back in issue 7. Peter Jeffrey's informal, chatty style was a pleasure to read and ensured that the column never descended into a po-faced criticism. All manner of questions about Lovecraft and his literary circle were asked, and then clearly and entertainingly answered by Mr. Jeffrey. His depth of research was very impressive, particularly given that this was all pre-internet. I wrote in with my own question about Lovecraft's story In the Walls of Erex and received a comprehensive handwritten reply in the post. The question was then included in a column in a later issue. And what impressed me all the more was that Peter Jeffrey didn't simply repeat the contents of his letter, but instead provided another equally comprehensive answer, teasing out further facts and background. One other notable article that I think just about falls under the umbrella of literary criticism was Lovecraft in the Comic Books by Randy Wadkins from issue 24. It's a fun article, lighter in tone than many that appeared in Dagon, yet nevertheless it's a pretty comprehensive review of Lovecraft in American comics, both straight-up adaptations of his tales as well as stories inspired by his work. There are some mouth-watering gems mentioned. I particularly like the sound of Cool Air, illustrated by the late Bernie Wrightson of Swamp Thing fame, as well as a few others that sound like they've been best avoided. Depicting Pickman's model seems to have been beyond some artists. Through it all, Mr. Wadkins' enthusiasm for the medium shines through. Entertaining stuff, and yet again inspires the reader to seek out the source material. So, there you go. Whatever your taste, whether you wanted a detailed analysis of Arthur Machen's influence on H.P. Lovecraft, a treatise on Thomas Ligotti's assault on certainty, or if you preferred Lovecraft P.G. Wodehouse mashup, Dagon had something for you.
Attic attack!
I'm in the lofty confines of the loft here at Dirk Towers. I'm in the attic where I store the archive of material from tabletop RPG's history. I have Blythe with me. Hello, Blythe.
Hello, Dirk.
Did you get through okay this time?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, I had to squeeze my huge sack through because I've invited listeners to share their experiences of zines from back in the day. And we've had a good response. So in this section, we're going to share some of their responses and talk about zines. It's fair to say, is it, Blythe, that back in the day, I was the one who would get zines. You weren't really turned on to them, were you?
Not really. I would read yours. I'm a cheapskate. I'd let you buy them and I'd read yours.
Yeah.
And think, why is he spending his money on this? And he could buy these shiny new miniatures. Look.
I think it was partly drawn by. I think the responsibility then to imagine really turned me on to fanzines. I did have a few early Dragon Lords which we can talk about, but it was really Mike Lewis's article in Imagine that really got me excited about them, and used to send off my stamped addressed envelope and get various ones.
Yeah, well, they were also quite a new thing. I mean, fanzines have existed for decades, haven't they? I mean,
Sammy's dad.
Small magazines and all that kind of thing, obviously. But for us at that age, this was a discovery, wasn't it? Because we didn't know about fanzines and small magazines and that kind of thing. Mm. So role-playing fanzines almost seemed like a unique element of role-playing games, that there were these fanzines in existence.
Yeah.
So it was kind of exciting. They were excited, and I think as well we come back to this all the time, don't we? That thing that in the 80s they burst the bubble that you felt you were in, because it was like there were other people out there producing these magazines talking about role-playing games. It was like finding life on another planet. Yeah. That there were these other people out there that were producing this stuff and writing about this stuff and asking, I suppose, some of the questions that we were asking about role-playing, about how I'm playing it right. This is how I play it. This is how I don't play it. Here's one of my adventures. That kind of thing that you could read and go, oh, well, yeah, we are doing it right. We do it a bit like that. My adventures are like that.
I think that's true. I think it showed that there was a world out there, but also what appealed to me was the sense of exclusivity.
Yeah.
It was very cliquey because the same names would appear in different fanzines. So if you pick them up, you've come to recognise people who contributed to the letters page.
Yes.
And they seemed very erudite, and because they were mainly at university and we weren't, they always seemed
that's true. There was an element where a lot of them, I mean, they weren't all older than us, but a lot of them were older than us in some of the fanzines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it felt like somehow you were vicariously becoming smarter by participating.
Joining the club. It's like the elite club. Yes. Yeah, there was that.
In their conversations about the finer points of traveller wind rules or something like that, yeah.
Well, I think, and that was always one of the ironies of role-playing back then, wasn't it? That in one sense you felt isolated because no one you knew played these weird games or wanted to play them or understood what you were doing. But at the same time, you would have been appalled. If you think back to school, if you set up a role-playing club, which we did, we got one member, didn't we?
We did get one.
We got one member. Which in a sense we were disappointed about, but in the other sense, if I can name you 10 people in that school that if they'd turned up to join, I would have been appalled.
Yes.
What you can't, you're not allowed to play this. So there was exclusivity. It was we want more people to play, but only certain people, only certain type of people, really.
Yeah.
And
some things never change.
Some things don't change, really. No, that's true. Yeah.
Now, before we look at some of these fanzines, a lot of these came out in the 80s and they deal with the thorny subject of humour. So I've got this for you to wear.
Okay.
I hope it'll fit. It's a magical item.
Oh,
it's
a bit snug. I've been on holiday recently. That's what I put it down to.
It's the girdle of postmodern detachment.
Yes.
So as fully signed up members of the Metropolitan Liberal elite...
Is it an 18-hour one?
I'm hoping it'll just last for the next 20 minutes.
Okay, I'll do. I can take it off then, can I?
Yeah, well, because we're members of the Metropolitan Liberal elite...
Of course, we are. We sound like that. We sound like the sort.
When we work in this, it'll mean that we'll be able to simultaneously have a critical distance from any racism, sexism, mocking of people with disabilities,
yes.
And general unpleasantness.
Yes.
But at the same time, this is where it's good, this girdle, right? Yeah. We'll be laughing with the sexism, racism, mocking of disability and general unpleasantness.
Yeah.
So, if you wear it,
kind of postmodern wear,
impossible.
You can do essentially what you want.
Yeah.
Whatever you want, say it's postmodern. Yeah. Leave me alone.
Ricky Gervais has one.
Yeah.
But this goes on the blink every so often. Now, okay, we can't lose with this. So I want to look at Dragon Lords.
Okay.
Because I posted on the blog a few weeks ago some pages from Dragon Lords.
Yes.
Some sample pages which covered some of the areas that Ian Marsh talked about last time.
Yes.
Yeah. And normally when I put a post on the site, people share it. People pass it on.
Yes.
I sensed a certain nervousness.
A reluctance to share it.
Like it, or express any kind of...
Okay. Why is that?
Allegiance to it. Well, you read it, so you know.
Well, I'm just saying that for effect. I'm just building up a bit of narrative there, trying to build a narrative tension. Why is that? Do tell us, Dirk. Do tell us.
It's fair to say that Dragon Lords did lots of things. So it had articles, it covered areas of interest, but the real life of it was in the letters page and some of the controversies it generated.
Yes.
And most of the controversy was about its representation of women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So on the covers, they would very frequently have nipples exposed.
Yeah.
And nipples would be discussed. It would be, like a toing and froing.
Like a kind of early RPG version of FHM.
Yeah, because I think in the 90s, by the 90s, you see, that's when the girdle of post-ironic
kicked in.
Yeah,
they were mass production then, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Everybody was wearing them.
Everyone was wearing one.
But in the early 80s and the mid-80s, comedy was being redrawn, wasn't it? It was being worked through.
Yeah.
It seems churlish, doesn't it, to criticise schoolboys, writing for schoolboys, of having schoolboy humour.
That's true. It does seem critical to criticise schoolboys for schoolboy humour. Yeah, it seems slightly unfair, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like calling, mocking elephants for having long noses.
I want to go back to this as a case in point.
Yeah.
Okay, remember we've got the girdle switched on, so we're all right doing this. The women in D&D article. So
Yes.
it was particularly controversial. So let me just have a read through it. Are you ready
Okay.
for this? All
I
right.
need to tighten the girdle for this.
Yeah. Women in D&D, strength 1d6. How many of you have been plagued by a woman who can't even open a screw top jar?
I think my wife would say she's been plagued with a man who can't open a screw top jar, but there you go. That's just me.
Intelligence. Toss a coin. Heads it's 7, tails it's 8.
Ooh.
It's all right, we've got this on.
It's all right, yeah,
it's all
okay,
right.
postmodern.
It's all right.
Yeah. Hilarious.
Yeah.
I don't understand that one. What's that? What does that mean? I don't understand that joke. If it is a joke, it's a joke, isn't it? I don't quite understand it. Toss a coin.
Well, let's see this one. Oh, okay. This is my favourite. I've got the girdle.
Yeah, okay.
Dexterity, 1d6 plus 1d8. They need a high dexterity to move their jaws so fast.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Charisma.
I don't know if statistically would that dice give you a high dexterity? 1d6 plus a d8? You better roll in 3d6.
It needs to be thoroughly play tested.
It does really, doesn't it? It's flawed.
Charisma, 3d6 but 2d6 in the rain if they're wearing water-based cosmetics.
Ouch.
And my favourite, I like this one.
When you say favourite, do you mean...
Favourite, because I'm laughing at it.
You mean favourite in a postmodern way?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Okay.
Alignment should be re-rolled every hour due to constant changing of attitudes. No.
How old were they when they wrote this? Was he 15?
Well, the thing is that because we've kind of put these out there, and there's a renewed interest in Dragon Lords, because honestly, it's really worth it because there's some great stuff in there. There's a really good interview with Greg Stafford in one of the later issues, and there's a clamour to make them available. And I think Ian Marsh has said, I'll talk with the guys and see if we can get it agreed. But he said they'll have to come with a health warning, because times.
Well,
have
he
changed.
does say in the interview, doesn't he, that there was an attempt to create controversy.
Yeah.
You can look at that in two ways. You can look at that as schoolboy humour. They've written that because they think that's funny.
Yeah.
Or you can look at it in terms of they're also trying to create controversy and provoke people into sending letters in, because that's what they want. They want a kind of energy to it. It's probably a bit of both, to be honest.
Yeah.
But they probably knew that was controversial.
In the heyday of fanzines, so in that mid-80s period, I remember that White Dwarf used to have its own kind of mock fanzine as an insert for subscribers.
Yeah.
And it was called Black Sun, and it was not usually used to promote Citadel miniatures. Surprise, surprise. But
The shape of things to come.
I remember in one, I've still got it. I've still got it in my Battle Cars box.
Yeah.
Because it was rules for drivers who'd become disabled.
Oh yes, yeah.
It's called battle chairs, and you could have use the Battle Cars rules to have a fight in a wheelchair. Let's have a look at some of these others that we've got then. So James Holloway has provided some sample pages from Twin World and Stormlord, and I'm going to put these up on the site, and I'll also put a link to James's site, because he's actually doing a podcast called Monster Man, where he's going through the Monster Manual, monster by monster. So it's a dream come true for us.
It is, isn't it?
I'll put a link to that. So this is what James has said.
Twin World and Stormlord were from the archives of the Cambridge University Role-Playing and Tabletop Society, formerly the Cambridge University Role-Playing Society, formerly the Cambridge University Dungeons and Dragons Society. For me, the zines are a fascinating piece of gaming history, and one that I'm glad to have had a chance to look at. Reading about the museum exhibits being prepared for this year's Gen Con, I wonder if there'll be someday a museum or just an exhibit devoted to the history of RPGs, or even the British community specifically. It seems that there are a lot of interesting things to say about the way in which these fanzines represent an early community where games inspired people to create and share things, and where there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the player and the game designer.
So that's an interesting point, isn't it? So fandom, this kind of need to house rule or make your rules available to other people is a phenomenon that is still apparent in the hobby, isn't it? Particularly driven by the internet. People want to share their hacks of the rules or their interpretation of rules or their spin or their scenarios.
And that's something that's it is very apparent when you look at a lot of fanzines from back in those days, that people feel, and I suppose it's surprising actually, that people feel almost from the word go that they can do that with these games. So you see it now, and it seems a natural thing now for people to do that. But back in those days, these games were relatively new, and yet almost from them being new, people were changing them and felt a sense of ownership that they could change stuff. So there's, I think one of the fanzines talks, there's something about rules about injuries in Traveller, and he's not happy with the injury system in Traveller. And there's another fanzine that talks about magic and says, all these magic systems, none of them really work, I don't like any of them, I want to invent my own system, and this kind of thing. And that's going on from a very, very early stage, isn't it? The games haven't been out long, and that's happening, which is interesting, you know. I mean, you don't get chess clubs doing that, do you?
No. Good.
I think your pawns should be able to move 3 squares, not 2. It's stupid. You don't get that.
This is a good point.
This is a fair point, yeah. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? That people feel that sense of not just sharing their house rules and sharing their interpretations, but they feel confident enough to do that, don't they?
Yeah.
So, whilst you can laugh at schoolboy humour and the silliness of what schoolboys are writing, but these are schoolboys who feel confident enough to say, you know what, I don't think this rule works.
Yeah.
I think it should work like this, and I'm going to put that in a fanzine and distribute it.
I think
there's a kind of confidence there about it, and a kind of ownership of these games, that these games are their games. They belong to people who play them. You know, D&D belongs to the people who play it, not Gary Gygax.
Yeah.
Almost.
And also I think it's to do with, you know, what I was saying earlier about, this is part of a university fanzine.
Yeah.
And a lot of these fanzines, many of them emerge from clubs. So clubs would have them as a glorified newsletter to circulate amongst their members and share ideas that way. So not necessarily looking for an audience beyond a wider group of friends, and it creates that element of exclusivity because it is so erudite, isn't it? You know, that you actually, the way they talk about it is so. You know, anybody who was outside of the hobby would not be able to make.
If you don't know, it's a bit like if it's it's 1982 and you don't know what D&D is, don't pick up a fanzine because you'll have even less idea. Because it is, it's niche within niche, I think is what phrase we've often used.
Yeah. Well, let's look at settings then. So this is from Hyperlexic from sunny California.
Tales of the Reaching Moon. RuneQuest was amazing. The system was structurally elegant and very brutal, but mostly I was hooked on the setting, specifically the Lunar Empire. The trouble was that it was 1995 and I was getting into Glorantha at one of the lowest ebbs in the last 40 years or so. There were some good recent Avalon Hill materials from what I later learned was Ken Rolson's editorialship, Sun County, Doristar, Strangers in Prax, but nothing was being published currently. So the only thing we could find was Tales of the Reaching Moon. In those early days of the internet, we couldn't even find how to reliably find this British magazine in the Bay Area. So every issue was like a secret document smuggled in by other members of our cult. A friend of mine was the most advanced and found them first. After that, I started to get them. Reaching Moon was my entry point into Glorantha fandom. Through Reaching Moon, I found the Glorantha Yahoo group and was a spectator there for many arcane arguments. Through the Yahoo group, I found out about the launch of Isaris, Greg Stafford's second company after Chaosium, and also the Mainz Index to Glorantha, which showed me how much material I was missing. An uncountable number of eBay searches later, here I am.
See, so this is an example, isn't it, where fandom keeps the flame alive.
Yes.
Yeah. So with the I think the way I described it last time, you get the ebbs and flows of the industry, and the wranglings and the various successes of games, but fandom can preserve something.
Yeah.
And I've got a few of Tales of the Reaching Moon. They do develop ideas about Glorantha, and it really does go into that kind of basket weaving type.
Yeah. Well, there is that. Yeah. But then again, I think these are in some ways the most interesting of the fanzines, because that idea of keeping alive a setting, it feels a bit more necessary to some extent. So if you were receiving that fanzine and this setting that you loved and played your games in wasn't being covered by the industry anymore, it would seem more necessary and more a kind of lifeblood of that setting that keeps it alive and keeps it fresh and gives you ideas. More so, I suppose, than an article about a house rule, which you can kind of take or leave, or even an article which is a scenario, which you might think, well, I can take or leave that. I might run that scenario, or I might not. But fanzines that develop a setting and keep discussion about a setting going is interesting. I mean, it's like when we played Stormbringer, wasn't it? We played Stormbringer, and I think at the time there wasn't that much produced for it, was there, initially, for Stormbringer? And a fanzine that talked about Stormbringer would have been great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That talked about the Young Kingdoms and picked out certain little references in the books that you might have missed and little bits. No, that would have been really, really good and really, really useful. So in some senses, those fanzines, I think, are more important and more useful. They're not giving you house rules, but what they're giving you is settings,
Yeah. So this fanzine came out during our deep freeze, and I think what it did was kind of take the bridge between Glorantha as we knew it as a kind of set dressing for adventures, and to create like a living, breathing world. Let's have a look at another one. I remember this one. It's Lankmar Daily Star, and Rob Knott, the editor and publisher, has written a fascinating piece which we're going to put into the Grognard Files zine, and he's providing some photographic evidence and everything. But here's a sample paragraph from the essay that he's written.
Lankmar Daily Star. Issue 9 was essentially one complete RPG system for my new game 2112, named after the Rush album, and it came out with a supplementary zine containing a ridiculously complicated magic system and other bits and pieces that raised the bar of what you might consider pretentious to mean. It was set in a sort of fantasy Europe and worked similar to Game of Thrones, with a series of noble houses that various players belonged to. From issue 10 onwards, I started broadening the scope of the fanzine to include numerous articles on RPG design, rules, a few scenarios, more play-by-mail games, and various non-RPG subjects dear to my heart, such as progressive rock music. Pretty quickly, I began lapping up lots of subscribers, and the zine seemed to be something of a cult hit. There were plenty of zines that served up a strict diet of standard AD&D material that had more readers than me, but I had all the cool readers, the ones who knew who Velvet Underground were.
How would you like to play in a game of 2112 Rush, for example? What could a strange device be?
When I touch it, it gives forth a sound. It's got wires that vibrate and give music.
Sold. You've sold it to me there.
See, this is a thing I love about fanzines. This is like my Daily Star did have this, and some of the others did. Now, like the Cambridge ones that we've looked at, to me, what they're doing is kind of replicating what was going on in mainstream magazines, so writing articles, etc.
Yeah.
I think where fanzines are interesting is where they have a touch of the personal. So people developing personal ideas and instilling them with a bit of personality. It's that tribal thing, isn't it? That tribal exchange.
Yeah.
And music is part of it, isn't it? Sort of prog.
Prog's RPGs and prog at one point went sort of hand in hand.
Yeah.
You know, a certain generation of role players, prog was the thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, Rick Wakeman in his pointy wizard hat, you know, played whilst you were pretending you were wearing a pointy wizard hat, being a wizard.
But I think it's an important point, isn't it, when fanzines find their own voice. Okay. Let's have a look at this next one. This is Tessarian, Tolkien fanzine. So not particularly about gaming.
No. Okay.
And this is from Graham Kinningsburg.
Tessarian, a Tolkien fanzine. Everyone listening will have had a gateway author, or perhaps a game, that will have introduced them to the world of geekdom. For a small group of friends in Greenock in the west of Scotland at the very dawn of the 80s, that author was the undisputed Lord of Fantasy Fiction himself, J.R.R. Tolkien.
Whoa, hang on a minute. I think it is disputed, isn't it?
It is disputed. We dispute
We
it.
dispute it.
Anyway, let's get back on to what he has to say.
Thus was born Tessarian, a humble little offering to go alongside those other grown-up publications. The production details are practically lost in memory, but I do remember the struggles with such archaic tech as a beribboned manual typewriter, Pritt stick, Tipex and ancient photocopiers. Issue 2, seemingly lost to history, was cranked out on something called a distetner, which I remember being as hideous to use as its name sounds, tripping off the tongue. However, our surviving issues are in surprisingly good condition, so we must have done something right, and I'm pleased to notice that the quality of the issues did improve. As for the content, well, please bear in mind our age. While we may squirm a little, okay a lot, reading them back now, we do so rather pleased and proud that we made the effort to give vent to our fledgling imaginations and creativity.
Now this is a great little set of fanzines that Graham's provided for us, because you got to remember that they were only 12 when they
were
did
12, and I do like the little personal introductions or bio notes that they've each put in, which are really kind of quite endearing, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, there's a kind of there's a real honesty to them, and I think at one point he says he's a wizard of second level, and that's pretty good going, you know. Not exactly a power gamer.
Well, there's also a quiz in here, so let's see if we can do it.
Okay, go on. A Tolkien quiz.
A Tolkien quiz.
No, don't do this to me. You know what's going to happen now, don't you?
What's that?
I'm going to look like one of those celebrities on Celebrity The Chase or Celebrity Pointless, where everyone's shouting the answer and they don't know the answer. You know.
Yeah. Well, let's have a go at this. Okay. Who was? You play along at home. You want?
Do play along at home. They'll shout the answers.
Yeah.
We're doing it. First question. Go on.
Who was Findigal? Who was Findigal?
Elrond's brother.
Elrond's brother. Okay.
Don't laugh like that. It could be.
I'll get you the answer.
Go on.
Findigal was the king's writer. He made a copy of the Red Book.
Oh, of course.
Of the West March.
Of course.
So give yourself 3 points if you got that at home. Well done. Okay. Now, this isn't a question, it's more of a statement.
This has been set by a 12-year-old, hasn't it?
It has.
It adds insult to injury now.
Can you beat a 12-year-old? Right, here it is.
Easily, with a stick big enough. There you go. Oh, politically correctness. I've got my girdle on. It's all right. I have a girdle of postmodern perspective.
Okay, here it is. So this one, it comes across as a statement, but I think the question is, what is? Right.
Okay.
But it just says the sword of Fingolfin.
It's a sword.
So I need more detail than that.
Oh, you mean who it belongs to or something? Belongs to Elrond. It's Elrond's sword.
No.
It's not Elrond.
Ringel was the sword of Fingolfin.
What?
It was the only weapon that wounded Morgoth.
Oh, right. Okay.
There you go.
Fair enough.
3 points if you got that at home.
Okay.
I hope you're keeping up. I'll do the last one. Okay. I like this one. What was Grund? What was Grund? Is it Grund or Grund? Grund.
I don't know because I don't know. Grund.
Go and have a guess.
Grund. Elrond's house. Elrond's castle.
It's actually the battering ram of Mordor used to break down the doors of Minas Tirith.
Okay.
6 points for that one. Well done.
Get extra points for that one.
That's great. So, let's have a look at... last time I struck a note talk about postal games. So here's frequent contributor Mike Cool about his experiences.
Okay.
Postal games. I did give it a try. I gave it a try twice, hoping to get some sort of support out of the government, which, theoretically at least, wanted all us unemployed people to become entrepreneurs and get off the dole that way. I wanted to do a hand-moderated RPGs. The players would send in up to a page of orders and I'd send back an A4 page of description of what had happened. I used the "you are the people from our world plucked into another" shtick for a setup. It was much easier than giving them a pile of background. And I planned all sorts of things, regular newspapers from the game world, so that even if people never met each other's characters, they would hear about what they were up to. Like I say, I did it twice, such was my optimism, once with GURPS and once with Over the Edge. And all that's left now is a few moves, a few copies of the newsletters, and one of the flyers for the version I called Beyond the Gates of Dream. I never got beyond the playtest stage, so I didn't charge people for it. It soon became clear that I couldn't just sit down at a word processor and produce an A4 of stuff in anything like realistic money-making length of time. Every so often I get the urge to scratch that itch again, probably by running a play-by-post game. I sit on the urge very firmly whenever it emerges again.
Mike wasn't one of our only listeners who ran a postal game. We've been sent some great artifacts, newsletters from Ian Brumney of Fenris Games. And Fenris now are magnificent model makers. They make figure sculptors and creators of minis, and they appear in Sandy Peterson's Cthulhu Walls, amongst other glittering credits. But Fenris actually started as a PBM company, and they have about 4 running, but the one I really like is this one. It's called Weird World, and it's inspired by the Spellsinger series of books by Alan Dean Foster, where there's talking animals in fantasy worlds, hamsters, chihuahua berserkers, and dwarves in pink bunny suits, and all the way through it Ian's got this kind of self-deprecating tone, but it's actually quite innovative. So this was done in 1988.
Yes.
The actual mechanics are
kind of ahead of the time in a strange way, aren't they?
Yeah. The mechanics are describe what you're good at. You know, so you can say, you know, I'm fairly good with a short sword. I'm really good with a long sword. I'm crap with a dagger. You know, you could say those things in your character description, and they would kind of
translate into mechanics. Or,
yeah. It's very, very good.
I think the only issue I've got with it is you might encounter a giant badger.
Yeah, well, you could play giant
I
badger.
don't want to play a giant badger. You know, certain things are ruled out, aren't they? There's a whole series of animals that really can't play frog.
You can't play frog?
Can't play frogman, no. It seems to only be mammals. Yeah, but it is ahead of its time, really. It's very well produced as well, you know.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's. I mean, we're going back to the postal gaming thing, aren't we? A little bit touching on this, but the fact it's kind of postal game, that mechanic of describing what you're good at and it not being too crunchy is good for a postal game.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that people, when we used to play postal games, no one ever really twigged that. Everyone used to try and translate crunchy systems into postal games, like we said earlier, we said in the last podcast about D&D, you know, listening at a door and that kind of thing, and exchanging envelopes endlessly to discover kind of outcomes. But in this, because it's a bit more fluid, it would work a bit better through the post, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. But it is quite an interesting game. Yeah.
Okay, before we close and go back out to the attic, we need to look at this fanzine, because this fanzine is an interesting one. It's Drew and Crow, and it's one that I contributed to. I contributed to a few fanzines back in my pomp when I was doing the PVM, you know, like David Cassidy holed up in my garret. Filling in
a minor postal game celebrity.
Yeah.
That may be a major postal game celebrity.
And of course, at that point, I was running a couple of PBMs, so I thought it'd be a good idea to do more in Drew and Crow, and I had a couple of them. And so the first one was a battle cars game, Colosseum. Okay, and this is from me. Are you ready for this?
Okay.
Bolton, 2087. A ruin. Not much different from today, actually.
Of course.
Where death is a mere statistic and poverty reigns. Once again,
not much different from today.
In the slums, societies have grown under the mob rule. The Colosseum is the latest in a series of arenas up and down the country which appeals to the masses of demented spectators and illegal duels to death. The new deadly sport of battle cars is here, this is one of the innovations of this. In the middle of the arena is somebody's house, right? Because somebody wouldn't move, so they built the arena.
They built it round him. Like one of those farmers who won't give up the house. They build a motorway around it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get some solid black areas of buildings. This is the home of Mr. R. Slicker. When the arena was being built, all the houses on the site were demolished and the occupants moved to alternative property. Before demolition, obviously. I'm glad I pointed that out.
Point that out, yeah.
However, Mr. Slicker was stubborn and refused to move. So they built the arena around him.
Do you know, it sounds like a rubbish game, but I think the idea of a Colosseum as part of Bolton's urban renewal strategy could be the answer, couldn't it? I mean, they keep building supermarkets and shopping centres, but really, they're missing the trick there, aren't they? A Colosseum is the thing. Send it off to the council. Now. Highlight that bit.
I'll put it in an envelope.
Yeah, put an envelope and highlight that bit.
The other thing I contributed was Brookside the RPG.
Yes.
Brookside the RPG. Now, for our younger listeners and for listeners in other countries, Brookside was a soap opera. Or as I insisted it was called, a continuing drama.
Continuing drama, yeah.
Yeah, soap opera. And it was a breath of fresh air. People forget how innovative.
It was quite radical for a soap opera, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because it dealt with some issues.
It dealt with issues. Well, it did a few things. So first of all, it was kind of social realist in style. So it didn't use a set. It was actual outdoor location. It was actually in a housing estate and filmed in there. And the other bit that was innovative was that it had young people in it.
Yeah. And
it had kids in it, and it had kids our age, and that's why we were drawn to it. That's why.
And if you watch, I think we got off the point a bit here, but if you watch a soap opera now, a lot of the things in soap operas now were really inspired by Brookside, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
Things that are normal now, dramatic storylines and stuff like that, were all there in Brookside years ago, weren't they? There were all sorts of bizarre, extreme storylines.
And so, what? Because if kids appeared in soap operas back in the early, they'd always be upstairs playing, wouldn't they? But
Well, it was like Tracy Barlow, wasn't it? In Coronation Street. I think Ken sent her upstairs to a room one night. She came back down 10 years later when she was 26 and played by a different actress.
Okay. So I'll read a bit of this.
Okay. Do I need to tighten the girdle of?
I think I will.
First.
Now, you've got to bear in mind. That this is my 16-year-old self here. We're mocking.
Yeah,
16.
I think it's worth also bearing in mind that I had nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing to do with it.
Okay. This is from, apparently, Terribly Stupid and Rotten Inc. Right? TSR. Terribly Stupid.
Oh, very good, yeah.
Come, Ed, you soft melt and play the game. Okay. In Brookside, the role-playing game, you control characters from the programme. Due to your limited imagination, we've decided to conform to TSR policy, as demonstrated in Marvel Super Earholes,
Very good. Play on words.
Yeah, and Indiana Jones by making you play pre-generated characters. Unlike Indiana Jones, you can die.
In Brookside, there's a high chance you will.
Yeah,
You'll be murdered.
It was a bit like Game of Thrones, wasn't it?
It was. It's Game of Thrones set in a cul-de-sac in Liverpool.
Yeah.
Imagine what you think.
Filmed by Ken Loach.
Yeah.
Because that was the thing in it as well. It was like the whole strata of society, wasn't it? So
yes.
you'd move around the close and they'd have different people.
Yeah.
So these are some of the characters.
Even though in that wouldn't be the case, would it? You wouldn't get really poor people living next door to really wealthy people.
But wasn't it like an emerging aspirant working class?
Yes, it was.
So
it was like aspirational.
Yeah, Bobby
Thatcher
Grant
and all that, wasn't it? Yeah.
It's a sign of the times. Right, okay. I'm going to read this. And
Go on.
I apologise now. I've got my girdle on.
I had nothing to do with it.
Okay. The Collins family. Paul Collins, 3 in brackets. I don't know what the 3
What
stands
does the 3
for.
stand
I don't
for?
know. Alignment. Ruddy fascist. Son of some German guy who started World War II. Thinks that Mrs. Thatcher, maybe God, was on the dole until he bought a Tebbit bicycle and found work at Petrochem, where he's trying to sack everyone. Fascist.
Did you write it? Rick from the Young Ones.
Receives turkeys as bribes.
What does that? I don't understand. Was that something in the?
It must have been.
It must have been. Must have make sense. That.
Right. Okay. Gordon Collins.
Okay.
Alignment. Poof.
Oh.
I was 16.
Yeah.
Don't judge me.
Well, I think we
Grandson of a German who started the Second World War. He has a face like a pan of worms, and everyone ignores him. I'm sorry about that, but I'm wearing a girdle. It's all right. Next one, the crosses. Now the crosses were like elderly.
They were elderly people, weren't they?
Yeah. Harold Cross, alignment, grumpy drawers. The closest answer to Mr. T. Senile delinquent who wears huge glasses with lenses like jam jar bottoms. Ex-commando who hates everybody. Okay. Edna Cross, 2. Alignment, wimp. Edna is played by an actress who's appeared in lots of programmes as an old woman ever since she was 16.
True, actually, wasn't it? She's using everything as an old lady.
Edna is a compulsive gambler who'll do anything from Russian roulette to running across the M6 for a bet. She's having a love affair with a man from Tibet.
Is she? Was she? I don't remember that.
Yeah.
You made some of this up, haven't you?
Yeah. So that's Brookside, the role-playing game. So nobody responded to it.
Did no one respond to it?
No.
Quite right.
I think people thought it was
A joke.
a joke.
It sort of is, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It is really.
I don't
Isn't it?
know I'd have done anything with it.
Yeah, what would you have done? What scenario would you have come up with? There's no rule system or anything. Just stupidity, isn't it?
Yeah,
You know.
general stupidity.
General stupidity.
So let's tidy all these up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to people have kindly provided some examples from the pages of fanzines, and I'm going to put them up on the on the site, thegrognardfiles.com, over the next few weeks, so people can see what's up there. So until next time, Blindy. See you later.
Okay, see you, Dirk.
Bye.
There isn't a last bit.
Thanks again to Ian for a tremendous, insightful and fun interview. Thanks to Daily Dwarf, Graham Kinniberg, Hyperlexic, Mike Cool, Ian Brumney and James Holloway for sharing their zine memories. Look out for scrapbooks to be posted on thegrognardfiles.com over the coming weeks, showing sample pages from the zines mentioned. Rob Knott of the Lankmar Daily Star has written a longer piece about his experiences as a zine editor that will be appearing in the next Grognard Files zine. We're currently hard at work pulling together this year's zine, ready to be launched in November. As well as Rob's contribution, there's articles from Ken St. Andre, Kihar of Dissecting Worlds podcast, Phil the Dice Mechanic, there's art from Liz Danforth, Russ Nicholson, and a collaboration between Wayne Peters and Paul Coburn. There's a Call of Cthulhu adventure, and a Judge Dredd scenario, and much, much more. The zine will be posted to Patreons anywhere in the world in December. The Patreon campaign funds these projects and helps to cover some of the podcast costs. If you'd like to join the Grog Squad, why not click the link in the show notes to find out more. You have until the end of September 2017 to join and get a hard copy. If you join after that, you'll get a PDF. But these things have to hold and flick through, surely, aren't they? If you'd like to download a PDF of the last Grog zine produced last year and the collected Daily Dwarf, then check out the link to Drive Through RPG. It's now there as a pay what you want, with all proceeds collected going to YSDC to support their church roof fund, so they can continue doing great projects to support Cthulhu fan activity. So far, we've downloaded 100 and raised $20. We can do better than that, surely. Why not give it a try? There's been a number of new Patreons joining this month, and I'll be doing a special round of thanks next time. I will be virtually giving $5 backers a Spy-Fi gadget from the Q manual from Victory Games and the James Bond role-playing game. Dirk the Dice will return in Fishfinger. Until then, adios, amigos.